I hope you've been watching our series of discussions here with my friend Albert Heinle on infrastructure scanning and how it can really help in cybersecurity, particularly if you're a developer, engineer, so on. So if you like that sort of thing, you're in the right place. I hope you stick around and enjoy our next discussion with Albert. Hi, this is Ed Amoroso from TAG. I want to welcome you to a second in a series of discussions that we're having with my friend Albert Heinle. Albert, thanks for making a few more minutes with us. I love talking to you because you had such an interesting perspective on infrastructure security and software and DevOps. It's nice to connect back up with you.
The feeling is mutual. I'm always happy to be here.
Hey, listen, what I want to learn from you today is
Mm.
a little bit about, say, the implications of what happens if infrastructure is misconfigured. Like, what are the implications on your cloud, on your databases, on your code? Talk to me about some of the bad things that can happen if somebody doesn't scan and detect that they've got misconfigurations in their infrastructure.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things is actually I have an AI generated image there somewhere where it shows, let's say you have a piece of software or your application that is running, and you have all CVEs patched, any dependency figured out, and done all your due diligence. But in the end, if you deploy it and the infrastructure just lets other people read your data openly, it's like you're leaving an open door of a fortress, right? So that is sort of the image that I always like to paint. It's like, yeah, you have secured all the walls and whatnot, but you left the door open, and that is in in metaphorically speaking what you're doing. So now, practically speaking, how big of an issue is this? 2023, Microsoft published a study that 80% of all ransomware attacks find the entry point through some misconfiguration. And that is an alarming number. And the reason people like actually using those attacks is because it's low-hanging fruit. They know how certain software pieces are configured by default, and they are probing for exactly these defaults. I mean, one of the things, for example, is MongoDB. It is by default is not using authentication, right? And the effect of it is that you have 35,000 different MongoDB instances in the web today that are openly accessible, and people can just do it, right? And the implications are obviously, also a little bit wider. If you look into the larger breaches that happened in recent or not so recent history, you can tell that the cloud has been very much fortified. But then there's usually an application layer that people have forgotten. One of the most famous examples is Capital One, which had the breach in 2019. And if you're reading the blog article by Brian Krebs on security, about the details there, you will notice, okay, there was a web server, Apache web server, which had like a module configured there and misconfigured. And this is the way how the attacker actually exploited this particular issue, right? So those things can happen. And it was clearly a blind spot. I believe Capital One did probably everything in their diligence to have the AWS configured correctly, but they had the source of human error, especially on this application layer.
Definitely a blind spot. You know, it strikes me that scale is different as well. Like the scale of having a flaw in my code affects is it seems like more an isolated problem than like a gap in my infrastructure could have much broader scope, I think. Talk to me about that. Like it seems like a much more dangerous problem to have infrastructure weaknesses than like individual code problems in some app. Am I reading that right?
Well, I mean, attackers have their favorite flavor of attacks usually going on. But when it comes to infrastructure, you basically have pieces of software that function as expected because you instructed them to do the things as they are expected to do. In code, you usually have your own customizations and ways how you are wanting to run it. And an attacker is trying to exploit different ways how you didn't intend to run that software, right? With those infrastructure configurations, and especially on the application layer, if something is open, it has sometimes permissions, it has sometimes items that it is allowed to do, and it is made to do. So one of my favorite examples was once there was a server which basically had a logging mechanism that you can call through an API, but you were able to put in another SED command to it as well, like some command parameters, and perform some remote code execution on it. And yes, that is a proper feature of that tool, but it was supposed to be limited and isolated and not accessible, whereas the attackers there were able to actually do that thing. So they are using, in a nutshell, the functionality of those tools because they're accessible to them, and then they can just go ahead and do it.
Seems like you could pick up on problems in an identity and access management infrastructure or policies by doing this kind of scanning. Like if my apps might be clean, to your point in the example you laid out, which is a good example, by the way. So everything's clean, I've run scans on, it looks good. But then I drop it into an environment like with weak IAM policies. Is that something you would pick up? Is that the kind of thing
Oh,
you might see?
absolutely. I mean,
That's pretty cool.
you are going after a very interesting portion of it because in many cases there's developers who have these services set up, and in the software they allow for one password and then it is shared among all developers, and that obviously poses a rogue employee risk. And
Yeah.
yes, you can configure those tools very often and normally with some SSO and with some retractable identity and all the cool things that you use from identity and access management. But on those low-level tools, those things are usually not applied. And that is what we're catching and usually warning people about when we're running our scans.
So how do you pick this up with your platform? Tell us a little bit about how the platform works and what is it you're looking at? How are you ingesting? How are you picking this up?
Okay, so let's say you have an infrastructure, and in in the ideal case, you already have it in a repository, but yet we can also pick it up from live systems as well. And you have, let's take a concrete example, Grafana, very heavily used by many organizations to do their monitoring. And in Grafana, you can have a setup where, you can have no authentication, you can have password authentication, and you can have SSO authentication. And this is a block within the configuration file. In its simplest form, we're looking at this configuration file and figure out how they have actually set up this access control for this server. The Grafana is a wonderful example because it's a very mature product. It has SSO capabilities, but at the very least, in some products, you have ACL files. And this is the kind of things that we're looking at. And even within those ACL files, we're scanning then, okay, is there maybe just an admin and a user, which is then again not a proper identity and access management. So we're scanning for all these things. Some are pretty much straightforward. You have done it wrong. Some are a bit more heuristic, like, how many users do you actually have and how is your, rotation going on there. So this is how essentially how we're picking up. And then, of course, if we are looking into the identity and access management tools like Keycloak and things like this, we're also, of course, looking into those configurations and making sure that there is a role-based access control that is fine-grained enough to withstand a rogue employee risk or items like this.
Is it usually pretty obvious what I need to do? Like I've been exposed to a lot of tools where I get telemetry, a report,
Hmm.
no idea what to do. Like, okay, well, how do you deal with that? Because you deal with a lot of customers that I'm guessing when they run this, they find problems. What is it usually pretty clear what you're supposed to do? Is it just a matter of closing a hole that you found, or is it sometimes more complicated than that?
So in most cases, it's like we have a description and then a remediation steps. And the remediation
Lay
steps
out the remedy.
describe
Yeah.
describe what you need to do within that configuration file in order to configure it. This being said, this is to most flags. Some flags are a little bit more complicated. Let's say you don't have any monitoring at all. That would then obviously require you to first set up a monitoring tool and then add it to this configuration. But then you also are getting the flag by us, hey, you are not monitoring here properly. You are at risk there that you are missing potentially an attack or have something where you are not able to put a postmortem after it. And yeah, items like this. So that is when it gets complicated, but most of the time is set parameter A to value B.
Have you ever run a scan on an infrastructure where everything was perfect and clean?
Well, I mean, I have seen very good ones, but I also have seen not so good ones. I mean, perfect and clean, no. But, I would say there was some where the effort in order to do this were literally done within a very short period of time.
Well, that's good. Well, I hope people who are watching will consider being in touch with you. Your website probably be the best place for them to be in touch with you. Is
Absolutely.
that how they can, and someone might be able to kick the tires a little bit with your tool and give it a shot and see how it works?
Absolutely.
I love that. I hope people watching will consider doing this. I think that what you have built is a wonderful complement to what most people are doing right now with companies like Wiz or others. So if you're watching right now and you're doing some scanning, you're missing a big part of it. Probably a big chunk of your target. The infrastructure layer is probably still somewhat exposed. So you should give Albert a call, and I think you'll find that your risk will go down. You'll be very happy with the results. So Albert, thanks for making time for us today.
Anytime.
Awesome. We'll come back again and we'll chat about another topic. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.